Today we're going to be talking about Sapper. Sapper is built on top of Svelte, and if you don't know what Svelte is, go ahead and check out my other video that I did on Svelte. Sapper takes Svelte and adds extra functionality on top of it. Essentially, it takes our front-end application and ties it into a JavaScript backend. It's really cool. It's really fast. It adds a very intuitive routing capability to it, and it makes our apps load really fast. Here's the Sapper website. It has a lot of extra information about it. We're just going to be getting into the basics of it, so let's go ahead and get started by looking at what we're going to build. Here's the application we're going to be building inside of Sapper. You can see it is a car listing site. To start out with, we're going to cover how to get our project set up. Then we're going to go over how Sapper handles the routes inside of an application. And then last but not least, we're going to take Sapper and consume data from our backend and show you how Sapper not only can consume data, but it can also prefetch data, making your app blazingly fast. To get started, go ahead and open up your favorite command line or terminal. We initialize our project using npx degit. We specify that we want to use the Svelte.js Sapper template. Additionally, we specify that we're going to use Rollup for our build process. It's possible to use Sapper and Svelte using Webpack, but we won't be doing that in this video. Next, we specify the name of our project, car-site, that'll also serve as the root directory of our project. We then change directories to go into the root of our project, and we run npm install to install all of our dependency node modules. Then we'll run npm run dev, which will start our Sapper project and host it in our browser on localhost 3000. If you navigate your browser over to the Sapper website on localhost 3000, you'll see that we have a very nice high-five website with the Borat on the front screen. You'll also notice that it says that it supports live reloading, which means that we are able to make changes back inside of our Sapper project, and those changes will essentially take effect immediately. You'll also notice that we have the home, about, and blog page. We'll get more into the routing pages of that, but for now, let's go ahead and test and make sure that our live reloading is working the way that we expect it. Go ahead and open up our car-site folder inside of your favorite IDE. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. Once you have it open, go ahead and go inside of the routes folder and open up the index.svelte, which contains all of the code for the home page of our Sapper website. Similar to how like an index.html would be the default file that loads when you try to open a particular route on a regular web server, the index.svelte will serve as the base view for whatever directory it is in. In this case, the routes directory is the base of the entire thing, so just by going to localhost 3000 without a route specified, we automatically open up the index.svelte that we have here. We want to verify that our live reload is working. To do that, let's go ahead and take our index.html and start removing some of the content. First, let's remove the content of our page and sadly give rid of the Borat. Next, let's get rid of the style tag and all the styling inside of it, since we won't be needing that anymore. We will go ahead and keep the Svelte head tag that will allow us to take and populate the title of our page. But let's go ahead and replace the content of that with Buy My Cars. Svelte head will take the title and hoist that up to the page, and so the title in the browser tab will be Buy My Cars. Before we go back over to our main page, let's go ahead and add a h1 header with hello there. This will give us a little bit more content on our page. Now if we go back to the browser, localhost 3000, we'll see that our changes have populated over. We have Buy My Cars as the title of the page, and our hello there header is there as well. If for whatever reason this is not displaying, I recommend checking your command line, because more than likely there's some type of error that's displayed there. Let's just go ahead and take a brief second to look at the overall file layout of our project that we created using Sapper. The Cypress directory has files that have to do with automated testing for your Sapper or your Svelte apps. We won't be covering that for this tutorial, but if you are interested in automated testing and Sapper, I recommend checking out Cypress. The Rollup Config has a bunch of different configurations for Sapper and Svelte. This is very similar to a config file you'd have inside of Webpack. We won't be getting into the details of this file, but I figured I'd show you that it's here. Next, we have a static directory that has a bunch of static image files, as well as a global.css that is for global styling across our application. And finally, we have the src directory, the source directory where most of our Svelte code will go. This will include our route pages such as index.svelte, as well as the shopping list page, as well as the components directory, which will host a couple of our Svelte components. Let's go ahead and right click routes and say new file and make a file named contact.svelte. This will allow us to create a contact page for our Svelte website. Let's go ahead and add content to our page by first making a header with contact us as the content. We go ahead and give ourselves a very original address from Finding Nemo, and then we also give ourselves a phone number to be contacted at that nobody will ever answer, but we put it there anyway. If you go back to the browser, localhost 3000/contact, you can now see the contact us page. That's because the routes contact.svelte automatically maps to the /contact route back inside of the browser. But you might also notice that we don't have contact in the menu yet. So let's go ahead and add the contact to the menu items. Go ahead and underneath the components directory, open up nav.svelte, and then once you have that open, let's go ahead and scroll down to the actual navigation part of the file. And let's go ahead and add another link to our menu that will have contact as the display content of the link. Let's add the aria-current attribute with some logic that'll allow the contact tab to display differently when it is the currently selected page, similar to how the About and Home page work right now. And add an href to the contact page, so when we click the contact link, it'll take us to the page that we want displayed. Back in the browser, you'll notice that we have a contact page, and we're able to navigate back and forth between the home and the contact page. Also notice that the /contact route is reflected when we select the contact page. And so if you look back inside of our directories, you'll notice that we have a blog folder inside of routes. We're not limited to having routes exclusively in the root directory, such as a cars.svelte and about.svelte. We can also break them down into directories. And this is really handy when we want to have a data source, such as blog posts or cars for our website. So if you look back over at our website, we'll notice that we have the ability to go to a blog, and that's actually loading up the index.svelte inside of the blog directory that's inside of the route folder back inside of our Sapper project. So continuing on with the similar concept, let's go ahead and create a folder named cars, and then inside of that folder, let's create a file called index.svelte. So whenever we navigate to the /cars directory on our website, we'll load up this index.svelte file. Once that file is created, let's go ahead and add a header tag that says my inventory, so we can preview this inside of our browser to verify that our routes are working like we intend them to. If we take our browser and navigate to the cars route, we'll see that we now have this header my inventory displayed on the cars page from that index.svelte file that we just created. Let's go ahead and open up our home page index.svelte and copy out the head tag from earlier. Let's take that head tag with the title and put it back inside of the cars index.svelte. So this way we will have a title displayed for our inventory list page. We'll go ahead and replace the text there with inventory list. Now back in the browser, you'll notice that the inventory list title that we just specified inside of our page is now populated up in the title bar of the tab that we are on. Let's start having cars to display on our inventory list. First, let's add a script tag, and then inside of that script tag, let's declare a constant variable named cars that is an array with a car inside of it. I just went ahead and pasted that data in with the year, make, model, price, and mileage as the attributes of the JavaScript object inside of the array. Next, let's go ahead and take that cars array and loop through it using the svelte each cars as car, and then we end that using the /each. Then we'll take our car and output the year, output the make, and then output the model. And this will allow us to verify that things are working like we expect them to before we get deeper into working with our car data. Back inside of the browser, we'll see that our 2019 Honda Accord is being displayed to the inventory list from that each that we just made inside of the cars index.svelte. We've now displayed our car out to our car list, but eventually I think we want to go ahead and display this car list on the home page as well. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and break this out into a Svelte component that we'll put in the components directory. So to do that, let's go ahead and copy out our each and then create a new file inside of the components directory and name that file inventorylist.svelte. Then inside of inventorylist.svelte, let's go ahead and paste in that each cars as car. Then we'll go ahead and make a script tag, and inside of that we will declare a cars prop, so that way we can pass down the property from the containing page. Let's go ahead and move back into cars index.svelte and start using the inventory list to display our cars and not the each that used to be inside of this file. Let's go ahead and import our inventory list from our components directory. And then we can take our inventory list component and pass the cars down as a prop to the inventory list component, so the inventory list component itself will be displaying the cars. Back inside of our inventory list, let's go ahead and add a header tag with test, just as a sanity check to make sure that our inventory list is actually what's being loaded for the cars and we haven't somehow accidentally messed something up. Back inside of the browser, we can see that our inventory list is being loaded in fact that header that we put in there to test it is showing up, so we should be good. Let's go ahead and remove that header we placed just for testing purposes. Let's go ahead and paste in some predefined styles from the GitHub project. Let's go ahead and get rid of how we're currently outputting information about the car. Next, we go ahead and define a div with the class of car card. Then inside of that div, we go ahead and make another div that has a class of details. We then add another div with class middle and content that'll serve as an overlay when you hover over top of a car inside of the car listing. We'll go ahead and add a header to display the car's year, the car's make, and the car's model. And we'll add another header to display the car's price. We will also output the car's miles to the inventory list. We will also append miles inside of the header. Let's go ahead and check and see if mileage is not defined. If that is the case, we want to go ahead and display something different. If miles is defined, we'll go ahead and display the miles, but if not, we'll go ahead and display not known. We'll go ahead and add the car's image by adding an image tag, and we'll link that based upon the year and model. Now, this is not perfect, and it's also limited to only JPEG images, but this is okay for what we're doing in the side of this video. We will add a class to the image tag that is of name thumbnail for the image styling, and we'll go ahead and add an alt attribute to our image just for best practice. Back inside of the web view, you'll see that our inventory list is populating correctly, but the images aren't being displayed, and instead we're getting the alt tag. That's because our server doesn't have any images hosted on it yet. Let's go ahead and add those images so it'll display it correctly. You'll need to download the finished project and go inside of the static folder and find the cars folder. Remember, static is where all of the static assets such as images and the global.css is stored. Once there, go ahead, right click and copy that folder so we can paste it into our working directory for our current project. Navigate into your car site folder and find the static folder for our static assets, and then go ahead and paste the cars folder into that directory. Go back to your car list, you'll notice that the car's image is now displayed properly, but you'll also notice that we only have one car and we can't click to go to it now. So let's go ahead and start looking at adding more than one car and also having the ability to navigate between the car's list page and a car's detail page. To start this process, we want to start increasing the number of cars we have inside of our inventory list. We could just keep listing cars inside of our index.svelte, but that really wouldn't be efficient since we want to be able to access our cars in multiple locations, and then we also want to be able to pull detail data from our car list. So let's look at making our data available via a RESTful API. Inside of the finished project, go inside of the source folder and then go inside of the routes folder, and then inside of that, go to the cars folder and you'll find a _cars.js that has our cars data in it. Right click on that and copy it. Then you want to take that file, go inside of the project that we're working on, go inside of the source folder, and then go back inside of the routes folder, find the cars, and paste it in there beside our index.svelte that we've been working on. We can open up our cars data file and we see we have year, make, model, description, mileage, and then at the bottom we're attaching an ID to each car for a unique reference key. That'll help us get to it for a detail page. Now I also want to point out that the _cars.js, the underscore is significant in that it tells Sapper that we do not want this to be accessible via the browser. So if we tried to go to /cars/_cars.js in our browser, we wouldn't be able to access this file like we can the other JavaScript files because that underscore is in the name. Next, we need to take our data inside of _cars.js and make it available via the REST API. Go ahead and right click on the cars directory, say new file, and we're going to name this file index.json.js. This file is actually going to run on the server side. It's going to open up our _cars.js, pull in all the data, and then send it back down to our browser to be consumed by our Sapper application. The first thing we need to do is go ahead and import cars from that _cars.js file so we can then take that data and send it down to the browser. Let's go ahead and take our cars array and loop through it and stringify each and every entry so we can then take it and send it back down to our browser. We create a function named get and export it so that Sapper knows how we want to handle our get request for our cars data. We go ahead and write out to the response head that we have a status 200, meaning that everything is okay. And then we also go ahead and tell it that we are going to be sending down JSON for our data format form. We then go ahead and write out the contents to the response that we got from our _cars.json earlier. Next, back in our cars index.swalt, we want to go ahead and consume our data from the API. We then go ahead and create a new script tag and give it a context of module, which tells Sapper that there are methods in here that Sapper needs to run. We go ahead and create a new function named preload that Sapper will know to invoke prior to loading our page. And with it, we pass in two destructured parameters, params and query. Inside of this function, we want to go ahead and fetch our data from the server, and then we take that data and we stash it into a cars variable, and we'll use that cars variable to pass that down to our inventory list. We no longer want to define our cars directly. Instead, we want to create a prop, and then we'll let the preload define what cars will be. So Sapper will fetch this preload and then populate the data it gets from that preload into the cars. So now if we go back to our cars list, we'll see that we have more than one car populating because it is consuming that REST API data. But one thing I don't like here is we're not really taking up the full page width because of some of the default styles that Sapper ships with. So we're going to go ahead and modify our main layout page. There's an _layout.swalt file in the base root directory that defines what the overall app looks like. We'll need to modify this file in order for that width to be larger than it is right now. We go ahead and give rid of the max width and just set a width of 100%. And I just wanted to take a second to note that I know we've done a little bit inside of the nav itself. If you see that segment inside a nav, this is actually where that's defined from. And if you ever want it to change your nav bar or put a different component as the nav bar, this file is where you'd want to come to make such changes. So if you switch back over to our browser, you'll see that our cars now take up more room on the page because we modified that main layout file. You may also notice that our cars aren't showing up inside of the nav bar at the top of the page, so we need to make that addition. We can only navigate to our cars by going to localhost 3000/cars right now. We can't click an item in the menu bar and let that take us to our cars page. Back inside of our components, nav.swalt, we're going to go ahead and add a link, and this link is going to link to the cars page, so we'll make cars the content inside of the link. Let's go ahead and copy some of the attributes from the home link down to our cars link, and then we'll customize those attributes to match what we need them to be for the cars link. We modify the href to go to cars, and then we modify the segment check for the current page selection to check that we're on the cars page. We add a rel equals prefetch property, and what this will tell it to do is when we hover over our link, it'll go ahead and start fetching our cars data from the server. So when we go to the cars page, it will load much faster because the data that it needs has already been pulled down from the server. Back on our website, you'll now see that we have a link that goes directly to the cars page. Another thing you'll notice if we go back to our home page is that we don't have our cars listed on the home page yet. So let's go ahead and use what we just learned about loading our data in from the server and apply that to the home page. Let's go back into the homepage index.swalt in the very root of our roots directory and delete the header from there, and let's start looking at pulling in our inventory list. Now let's go back into our cars index.swalt file and just be very careful right now because we're going to be operating with more than one file of the same name. And let's go ahead and copy our prefetch code that prefetches the data for cars.json and then move back into the homepage index.swalt. We'll go ahead and paste that code inside of our homepage index.swalt. Then let's go ahead and make another script tag that will contain a cars prop, and that cars prop will of course contain the data that we fetch from cars.json. And then we go ahead and import our inventory list from our inventory list component. We then take that inventory list component and pass it a cars prop so we can load our cars into our inventory list on our home page like we intended. Go back to the home page, you'll now see that the inventory list is displayed like we intended it to. Just a quick note, we didn't take the time to update the link to prefetch the data, but you can do that if you want to. If you click on a car, we still can't go to a details page. We would expect it to link to something like cars/ID. So it should link to something like localhost 3000/cars/1, with 1 being the ID. But right now we still get a 404. We need to build this details page, and we also need to add the ability to link the car. So let's go ahead and get started on that part. Let's go ahead and create a new file on the cars directory, and we're going to name that file slug.swelt, with the slug being inside of brackets, and this will allow us to access that slug and use it to look up which car we need to find. Then we'll go ahead and add another file and name that slug.json.js, and this will be the file that is responsible for getting the data on the server side out of cars.js and passing it back to the browser so we can consume it from the REST API. Let's start by writing the server-side code that will actually get the details for the car and pass it down via the REST API. To do this, we start by importing cars from the cars.js file. We then define an exported function that knows how to handle the GET request. So when we get a request for a car's detail, this will handle that request and pass back the data about that particular car. We are then able to destructure the params off of the request object and get out that slug that has been passed in, such as the car ID. That would be something like 1 or 2 or 3. And then we're able to take that car ID slug and filter out the cars list that we pulled in from cars.js and get the particular car that we are interested in. We then check to make sure that the particular ID that we have passed in was able to return a car in the list by checking the length of the array that's passed back. We then provide code that indicates a 404 status when we try to find a car that's not inside of our data set. We then take the first car out of the array and assume that we only have one car that can be fetched from the data set because the ID should be unique for our data set. We then indicate that we have a 200 status OK response and specify that our content type for the response is going to be JSON. We then take our car, convert it to JSON, and write it out to our response so we can get it back inside of our browser as JSON. Now we can go back into our browser, take our link, and append JSON to the end of it, and you will see that if we do this with the ID and the .json, we'll actually get the JSON data back so we can preview that our REST API is in fact working for our car data. Next, we open up slug.swelt, and we start by adding a script tag, and this script tag will be where the code will go for fetching the data from the API. We go ahead and declare a preload method that'll be called before the page is loaded, and this method will reach out to the server and fetch down the data. We're able to go ahead and pull the slug out of the params parameter that is passed to the preload method. We then use that slug and we await for the fetch response by fetching data from the cars, and then we specify the slug as the ID.json of the data that we want to get back from the server. And we then take that data and get the car data out of the response. We check our response to make sure that we have a status code of 200, meaning that everything is okay. And once we know that everything is okay, we take that data and we set the car property of our component. If for some reason everything is not okay, we go ahead and take the response status and the data.message and output it. So for example, if we were not able to find the car that we wanted, so we requested a car that had an ID of like 2000, but that car was not in our data set, this is what would happen. We go ahead and define another script tag, and we also create a property inside of that script tag and name it car. So that will be the value that is set via our REST call up inside of the other script tag. We now need to take that data that we got back inside of our property and use it to display stuff to the screen. We start by putting out an image. We go ahead and we add a header tag to display the car's year, make, and the model. We output the car's miles, and I just want to note we're not going to account for the case where the miles is not defined. So if you want to look and do that yourself, you're more than welcome. And we add in the car's description. That is just a bunch of lorem ipsum text. If we don't tell our image what the width should be, it'll become an obnoxiously large size due to it taking its actual width. So we go ahead and tell the image that we want it to be a width of 400 pixels. Now, if we go back to our browser and try to link to one of our cars, such as car number 1, we can now see that the data is displayed properly. But if we go back to the cars page, we're still not able to navigate directly to a car by clicking on an image. So we need to go ahead and add this functionality. Inside of our inventory list component, let's go ahead and import goto from the Sapper/app module. And what this will allow us to do is it'll allow us to take that goto function and call it and modify where we are inside of our app. We will register an onClick listener for the base card of our inventory list. And when this car is clicked, we want to tell it to go to this specific car's details page. Now if we go back to our car list and we click on one of the cars, it'll now take us directly to that car's details page. So that's pretty much it. We built this cool little website using Sapper, and we learned a lot of the basic functionalities such as loading in data and providing data, and then also how routing works inside of Sapper. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you have any questions.